Good morning, Karen.
Good morning.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
We were talking before we started recording that I had a difficult time remembering how way back when we had connected, but you had reminded me. But I appreciate that we're connecting again and that you're on the podcast. And can you tell the listeners your full name and where you're located?
Okay, well, my name is Karen Whitehair, and I'm located in Frederick County, Maryland.
Oh, okay. You're not too far from me up here in
No,
Cumberland County.
no, pretty close.
down
Yeah,
down the 15 corridor.
exactly.
How long have you been
Exactly.
in Frederick?
For about 18 months.
Okay. So you had moved to different places for museum work or?
In a way, yes, and also to get my daughters to a better school. I had been in Charles County for about 15, 16 years, and we wanted to get, since they were entering, my twin daughters were entering high school, I wanted to get them into a better high school situation. So we
Uh,
moved up here.
okay.
Yeah,
Frederick is a neat town, a lot of history, huh?
it is. Yeah. I mean, the whole county, it's the whole Western Maryland, lots of different stories to explore.
Don't they have a little children's museum there in Frederick? Is it like owned by the city or something?
Yeah, it's on Rose Hill.
Okay, Rose Hill.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah, yeah.
Is it open now or are a lot of the places closed?
A lot of the places are closed sort of in a hybrid way in the sense that, like um, some do it by appointment. You can visit in groups by appointment.
Mhm.
I know there was one right in downtown Frederick that actually were doing, walk-in visitation for a little while in the summer, but that's ended
Yeah.
basically with the surge that occurred, starting in late October. So most are doing more by appointment.
I saw it was maybe a couple months ago. What they're called, what, Historic Frederick now, or Frederick
Yeah,
County Historical Society was looking for
yeah,
an executive director. That was interesting. I saw that posted. They have a
yeah,
pretty active historical society there, I think.
yeah. It is very active, and there's some smaller historical societies like that most people have never even heard of. But like
Mhm.
actually, it's in Washington County. There's the Keedysville Historical Society,
Hmm.
and one of the things they've done over the past year was they had a quilt that was given to the Pry family when they left Maryland in. Um, the 1870s. Their house was actually McClellan's headquarters during the Battle of
Hmm.
Antietam.
Oh,
And
wow.
because of what happened there, and their house was, quite literally turned into a hospital. The barn was filled with people. The house was filled with, injured people.
Hmm.
And so, this family was basically financially devastated. And so by the, 10 years later, roughly speaking, they just couldn't make a go of it. So they moved. And the residents of Keedysville actually did a quilt where they all did like signatures on each one of the patches,
Hmm.
on each one of the squares, saying you remember us and we'll miss you and all this. I mean, it's wonderful. And so what they did was they um, found a space in what is now the town hall. It actually used to be a bank, but it's now the town hall. They're using the safe
Hmm.
to actually store the quilt and display the quilt. And so that's actually out on display, and people can come see it. And they also have taken photographs of each one of the squares, so you can actually read what the people are saying, and it was conserved and
Hmm.
and so forth. So that's kind of a really cool project. But you probably have never heard of Keysville Historical Society, but that's one of the cool projects that's
Yeah.
happened in this little, sort of out of the way community.
Yeah, I
So
mean those little project, there's like tens of thousands of them all over the place.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So you're, uh, can we back up a little bit and share, how did you get into, we were talking off air too, that you have a particular expertise in collections management and taking care of objects and that sort of thing. How did you get into that?
I've basically been involved in the museum. I literally started volunteering back in 1984. And but all the advice I got at the time was go into museum education. So that's I did internships in college in 90 and 88. And I thought I was going to go into museum ed. I thought that was a logical thing to do because
Hmm.
that seemed to be where the growth was. But between my undergraduate and graduate school year, I volunteered at the John J. Homestead in Katona, New York. And while I was focusing on education stuff and wrote some education packets, they sent me upstairs to do an inventory of the paintings they had on the second floor. And I was
Okay.
like, this is fun. Um, and then right after I finished my graduate program, my first paid job was doing collections work for National Park Service at Royal National Park. And from there, I was just
What park? Sorry.
Isle Royal National Park. It's a archipelago out in the middle of Lake Superior.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, basically the only way you can get to it is by boat or seaplane.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was a really cool experience, and
Yeah.
I was hooked. So I, pretty much have been doing largely collections management work with a brief stint as an executive director and a stint working at IMLS and grant management. But pretty much 30 years of working with collections and um, really love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So do you you've seen a lot of changes over the years then in how things are done in the field and just also the growth or not growth of certain parts of the industry. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been, a tremendous growth in the industry and an increased focus on the industry, but I'm not entirely sure that's always been a good thing because
Mm,
I know that like when I was doing the internships at like the Colorado Historical Society, they sat us interns down to explain to us, how do you get a job in the field? Um,
mhm.
and they pretty much, believe it or not, said, well, people leave this field feet first. And so how you get a job is you look in the obituaries and you basically, wait for somebody to die and you're going to feel like a vulture, but that's how you get a job. And this was back in 1988.
Wow.
Um, yeah. And at the time there were, just a handful of museum studies programs, like legitimate museum studies programs, not survey programs like they had at my undergraduate institution.
Mm,
Um, but when I graduated from the GW program in 94, all of a sudden there started this growth in museum studies program. There was one in Nebraska, University of Nebraska, University of Oklahoma, and then it just sort of exploded.
mhm,
And so there, all of a sudden, there's all these, people entering this field that was already really competitive anyway. And I remember thinking, where are they going to go? You know,
mhm,
and I think, we've had literature in the field, periodically popping up, kind of saying the same thing. It's like, are we doing these people a disservice?
mm,
Um, so yeah, there's been a lot of positive things happening. I mean, I think recently with, more focus on diversity and, opening up multiple voices, and allowing people to curate through their own voice, I
mhm,
think are incredible developments that we really want to encourage.
mhm.
But in other cases, there's been other things that's like, okay, we need to slow down and rethink this.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think on the human resources side of things, um I think it's a field that's really struggling, whether it's we're grappling with topics like unpaid internships or the
yeah,
abysmal salary issues that mid and smaller institutions are facing, or even the large institutions for the, mid range to first hire people.
hmm,
um I mean, the salary thing is just horrible to the turnover. I mean, the sort of
yeah,
you're with an institution 6 months to 2 years, and then there's something isn't jiving, and so you move on, and that's a major issue too, where we've just got this
yeah,
musical chairs too. I mean, I think they're to your point, I think the places that are really stable, eh, those are the people leaving feet first, and then you've got sort of this musical chairs of a lot of the other places. And did you experience any of that in your career?
Um, I think, I've experienced sort of both of those. The
Mhm.
places that I most enjoyed were the places where, management understood the mission,
Mm,
and, management understood that, hi, we are a nonprofit. Our obligation is to serve the community,
mhm,
rather than serve ourselves. And I think those are the institutions that are truly, truly thriving.
mhm,
It's the institutions that are very inner focused, that makes it really hard for, especially, starry-eyed new professionals coming in with, a lot of creative ideas. They get really frustrated because the boards are predominantly sort of, baby boomers, and they kind of focus in on, um, a lot of the, um, sort of doing things that they want to do, and not really looking out into the community to find what the community needs are. So
yeah,
yeah, I have experienced that in places where I've really loved being there. Were very
mm,
much those places that were rooted in, this is what we do.
yeah,
We're community focused.
yeah. One of the other things that I was hoping we could get into a little bit was talking about the some of the difficulties in working in the profession term, or and also finding work during this pandemic. And there have been a lot of museum professionals, including myself, who have decided for different reasons, or have had it decided for them, um, that they're taking a break with museums. And I'll tell you my story quickly. Um, I had resigned from a very stable position uh, last fall, and I was with an institution for 7 years. And of course, we were chatting that this podcast has been a real inspiration for me, and I have a blog, and I've been writing, and I'm still involved with like AEM, peer review, that sort of thing, and looking for work. But the the mental and emotional tests that you go through when you're in and out of work, or you're trying to find a job, and that can be really draining on it's been draining on me. And um and I imagine there's a lot of museum professionals that are going through those emotions right now.
There are a lot of people going through those emotions. There are a
Yeah.
lot of people who are very much wondering, why me and not somebody else?
Mm,
I look through the roster through, like, on LinkedIn, and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's this really talented person, another really talented person, I mean, it's
mm,
shocking. Um, but that it's in a lot of respects, there's almost like a brain loss.
mm,
And so I think it's really important for people to remember that because you have worked in a museum, I felt, especially if you've worked in a small institutions, you have a lot of transferable skills
mm,
because you have to communicate. You have to do project management. You have to do a lot of different things, in order to manage, um, the work that you do.
mm,
And there are businesses, and other nonprofits who would, love to have you. So in a lot of respects, that's one thing I think people need to kind of keep in mind, is that
mm,
it's not the end. Um, Over the past 5 years, I mean, I have really struggled. I left in some respects, what I would consider probably my dream job. I was working in an 18th century historic house and working on collections.
mm,
It was my, academic base as well as my, professional base, and I loved it. But after 10 years, I felt, it's time to try something else. And I was encouraged to take a position as an executive director at a very, very small place. The budget was only like 91,000, very
mm,
small, two part-time staff people, including myself. Um, and I was told certain things going in, um, but one thing led to another. In the sense of, I ran into a situation where I was exploring, that my predecessor had wanted to do a summer camp. And having kids of my own, I looked around and said, where are you going to put the kids? This is in a really teeny tiny turn of this 20th century farmhouse. The rooms are basically, breeze width wide,
Hmm.
pretty small. And
Right.
sorry.
That's right.
And and so they were just, breeze width wide. And I was like, you have some place to put the kids. And they were like, oh, we can just put up a tent. And I'm like, well, what if there's a, thunderstorm warning or something? No, we can't. And so, well, you need to find another place to put them. So I got in contact with the local Parks and Rec, and the guy said, partnering with us, the bus fees are going to kill you. And so I looked into our own space, and they had a garage affiliated with this building. I thought, oh, well, we could clean all this stuff out and we could turn this into, a lecture space, and we could turn it into an activity space, and, basically programming. Well, it turns out it was owned by the city. Both the farmhouse and the garage were both owned by city. It was slated solely for storage. It had no occupancy permit at all. It
Hmm.
did not fit any kind of, building safety codes. And it was just like it basically created a lot of, all of a sudden all the dirt sort of, filtering up,
Yeah, dust kicked
that had
up.
been
Yeah.
kind of grounded for a while.
Mm.
And eventually the founder of the organization sat me down and he said, Karen, we don't care about museum professional standards. We don't care about museum ethics. And so you just need to turn a blind eye when we do things that violate that.
Mm.
And it was like somebody was saying, we don't care about your values. And I was really shocked. And
Mm.
so after about 2 months of letting that fester, I resigned. And then I found myself in another that I was laid off from in April. Another situation where they basically go through collections people like
Mhm.
candy.
Mm.
They went through, 3 collections managers in 4 years, and now they've gone through 4 collections managers in 6 years. Um,
Mm.
and you have to kind of, stop and wonder. They blame the collections people for this,
Mm.
but it's one of those things where I think a lot of, boards and people in administration really don't understand what collections people do and
Mhm.
the importance to their institutions. And so they kind of ignore them, or they push them aside, or in this case, push them out. And I think I know that there are a lot of collections people who are confronted with this. Many of us, feel misunderstood,
Mhm.
because we're always the ones going, "Oh, that's a great idea, but have you thought about, all these legal, implications that might go along with it?" And
Mhm.
well, you're the naysayer and the troublemaker, and those kinds of things. But we're not. We're actually trying to watch your back. So
Mm.
I think that's one of the challenges that we have in the field is, collections are the heart of the institution, but in so many places they've been neglected, um, or they're kind of afterthoughts. And I don't know how that's going to change, how that's going to be turned around,
Mhm.
and how we can correct that. But I think, one of the things I've learned through the last few years is that it's so important to be true to yourself
Mhm.
and to be honest with yourself. And if no job is worth, um, if no job is worth it if you're being treated badly,
Mm.
and especially considering the pay most of us get, um, there are better things out there.
Yeah.
And so it's like you have to figure out what's best for you and how best to use your skill sets. And yes, I mean, I'm going through a mourning process. I mean, I literally thought I'd be one of those people who would leave feet first.
Right.
But I'm kind of looking at the lay of the land and thinking, I'm not sure there's any room for me anymore.
Mm. Yeah, and you know what? One of the things that I hear from, I I joke sometimes that working in museums is a little bit like the mafia. Like
Yeah.
you just you get so wrapped up in, and I think maybe other people in different professions have this happen where it becomes your identity. You know, I'm a
Yeah.
I'm a whatever. That's my identity. It's like, no, you aren't a museum professional, Jason. You're a dad, and you're a homemaker, and you're a partner, and you're, a community member and a citizen and all of these other things, and you happen to
Mhm.
work in with
Yeah.
museums. But
Yeah.
I don't know. It just seems like in the museum profession, a lot of us grapple with it the other way around. Like, I'm a museum professional and this is my identity, and trying to let that go is
It,
really is difficult.
it's painful.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I can remember saying multiple times, I can't imagine doing anything else in spite of all the dysfunction.
Hmm.
Um, it's in my blood. But at the same time, is it is it necessarily worse? Um, being in positions where you're disrespected. Um, I don't feel the money issue is. I understand for young people coming up and being able to get people in from disadvantaged communities into the field when we need those voices desperately. It's a big issue because they can't
Hmm.
afford to do it. But the field has, from its inception, been a rich person's game anyway.
Hmm.
It's always been low pay. It's always been, I remember watching Phil Donahue, which for those of you who don't remember, Phil Donahue is a talk show.
Yeah.
In fact, he is kind of the father of talk shows. And he actually invited somebody on who wrote this book about, how to find a rich wife. Um, and one of the fields, you say, where do you look? Well, go to a museum and you'll find a lot of rich women that you can, date and marry. And it's true. I mean, when I've had interns, I've asked them pretty consistently, so what did your parents do? And it's been like doctor, lawyer, business executive, just straight down the line. It's an upper middle class, female profession. In so many ways. And so how to change, the 100+ years of inertia in order to make it, how to level it down. And how can you help like smaller organizations be able to finance those salaries necessary to bring really talented people in who normally haven't been part of the museum community? That's going to be a challenge because I know that the place where I was told, we don't care about standards, go, just
Hmm.
don't look at it. I know they were tickled pink to have a part-time staff person working minimum wage in Prince George's County, Maryland, which was about
Hmm.
$11 at the time.
Hmm.
And they thought they had arrived. And it's like, no, that's kind of sad. But there's a lot of places like that are just, we have a part-time, we have a staff person, we have a paid staff person,
Hmm.
we're there. Um, so
Yeah, and
how do we address that?
yeah, I've noticed uh, with mid-range budget places too. That there's 10 people making 20 some thousand dollars a year. Well, would it be better to maybe have 5 people making, 40, 50, $60,000 a year? And like that's the other thing is, I think maybe across the board, we need to really examine like the idea of deflating the staffing at places to a point where it could be better to pay one person 60 some thousand, 70, and have a couple part-time people rather than, yeah, for example, having 3 or 4 people making 20 something, no health benefits,
Yeah,
that kind of thing.
yeah,
um, but that takes a lot of really strong leadership at the board level to make those decisions, to entrench a little bit at an institution, because it's scary. You think, oh, well, we won't have as many positions and we won't be as effective, but that's not always the case.
no. I
Yeah.
mean, if you have a positive work environment, like a lot of leadership books will say that, people that, feel valued will work their asses off.
Yeah.
It's people that are disrespected who get into an attitude and then don't work as hard. It's like, well, why bother? And so
Hmm.
yeah, it's I think that's another point is how the Achilles heel for so many institutions are the boards. How do you get good solid leadership in the board too to be able to make those decisive decisions so that they can really move and the organization forward so it can thrive
Hmm.
rather than just kind of limping along.
Yeah. Yeah, board development and the dynamics of a board can make or break an organization for sure.
Mhm,
Um, I think having a good balance on a board is really important. All the different types of diversity, people with business experience and non-business experience,
mhm,
um, and I think what I've noticed too is that having people that have been managers of places or have been managed, and in my circumstances, and it's been helpful because those people can relate what it's like to be have autonomy or be micromanaged, that kind of thing. And so you have a voice on the board, someone who kind of gets that, like
mhm.
um and a micromanagement. Oh, I mean, you could have
Yeah.
a whole other podcast about the issues related to that, and trust issues, um, and one of the things that that's another thing that I'll speak as an executive director. I probably was guilty of when it came to collections things, is that the last thing I wanted to do was to be a micromanager, and so I thought, it was like pure intentions. I thought, well, if I just ignore the collection side of things, then I won't micromanage and but that's not a good approach either. You have to be engaged with the collections and not just ignore them, like you were saying.
And I think a lot of I think one of the problems with collections, especially smaller organizations, is a lot of people don't really know quite how to deal with them. And in
Mhm.
some cases, they have been managed so badly from the inception with poor records and so forth that it just seems like a overwhelming task. And I think both boards and administration have a hard time fully understanding how important it is to have a well-oiled, totally efficient collections program. They just see it as this sort of money dump, and
Mm.
they don't see how it can move the organization forward. And I think collections people, because most of us are incredible introverts, and really just kind of want to be left alone to do our jobs. It's
Mm.
very hard for us to do the engagement of the boards. It's hard for us to advocate for the collections. Um, and we have a tendency, because we're kind of like, as my husband likes to say, we're kind of like neonatal intensive care unit nurses, where all they focus on are the things that can go wrong
Mm.
rather than the things that are going well. And
Mhm.
so they'll prattle off all the things that may go wrong with your child while it's hooked up to the ventilator.
Right.
And you're, as a parent, you only hear the bad stuff. You don't hear the other stuff. And so it's that kind of dynamic. I think collections people also have to do a much better job advocating,
Mm.
and really educating um, staff members as well as the board how the collections really do intersect, and they aren't just a mini sink, and getting something and sticking it on the shelf isn't enough. There's
Mhm.
so much more to it. And so that's I think one of the big challenges for the field after COVID. How
Mm.
do you get those objects to work for you
Right.
if you aren't willing to invest in it? So
Yeah. And for people to understand that if you have a collection item or an object that is totally unrelated to your mission, there are proper avenues and mechanisms for figuring out what the heck to do with that object and how to perhaps deaccession it or even sell it or whatever. I mean, every institution has those whatever, thimbles that are from, I don't know, from
That
France, that why on earth do we have these things? And it's okay to grapple with those issues and to figure out what to do with them. And in fact, that's probably a priority because they're taking up space and energy and staff time.
well, one thing I was really kind of surprised. I was reading an article in one of the professional literature magazines, and they were advocating, oh, don't worry about doing the research, just get rid of it. And I was like, there's these legal issues behind it. I don't think that's a good idea, but nobody wants to bother with doing all of those hurdles to, go
Mm,
back and try and track down title, or to do due diligence to prove that you at least tried before you move the stuff out the door.
hmm
Um, and
Yeah.
I think that trend is concerning.
Mm. Yeah. I think at least in from what I've seen, at least on the front end of things, it seems like museums are getting a little bit better. Maybe not all, all of them, obviously, but there it seems like even from when I first started out about 20 years ago that on the front end, smaller institutions are filtering things a little bit better in terms of what they're accepting. I mean, when I first started, it was just a free for all. You just accepted everything. But now it seems like they're getting more comfortable with saying no and
Yeah.
um, or steering people in a different direction.
hmm
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there is definitely a trend in that direction, which is a good thing because in a lot of respects, I mean, I remember seeing a museum in Southern Maryland where they literally had a sign on their glass window of their lobby saying, "Do not drop things out here. We do not accept." Just, but people were literally kind of treating it like they do the Salvation Army, where they just kind of drop it and run.
hmm
And now it's yeah, there are a lot more firewalls put up in order to filter things better, as you say.
Yeah. Well, is there any last parting words of advice or final thoughts for peers or even people first starting out about working or um, that you'd like to share before we have our lightning round?
Okay. I think there's actually 2 points to address the old timers like myself, as well as the young people coming up. Um, I think for young people coming up, go in with your eyes open. Make sure you've done all your homework, so you aren't shocked when you go in and you find that there's still a lot of 19th century attitudes. That you're Don't be shocked when you're not paid as much as your friend who went into for-profit business.
Hmm.
The field that's just how it has always been. Yes, it needs to change, but that's how it's been.
Hmm.
You don't do this because you're going to get rich. You do it because you love it. And for people that are have been doing this for a while and have been displaced, you have a lot of skill sets. There's no way you could have done your work in this field for years without having a lot of transferable skill sets. You can communicate, you can manage, how to keep track of things. I mean, you can do a lot of things that can be shifted. You just have to know how to sell it properly in order to shift into something else if you feel the need to.
Hmm.
So, and I think the most important thing for everybody is listen to your gut, listen
Hmm.
to your heart, and do what is best for you. And don't feel like you have to basically, submerge your value systems in order to work in a museum. You don't.
Hmm.
Do the right thing. Do what
Yeah.
you feel is right for you.
Yeah. And on interviews, one of the things that you just made me think of is interviews ask about the particular position too. That's one thing that I over the years I wish I would have done more. Is how many people have been in this position? What a question to ask in an interview to get a sense of things. Yeah,
I think that knowing, really asking tough questions about the corporate culture and
yeah,
what their real values are. I mean, they're going to say up front, "Oh, of course we value diversity," But then if you, kind of look at who's interviewing you and you don't see diversity, well, you know, it's easy to say, but
Mm,
are they gonna, do the walk? Are they just
mhm.
gonna talk about it? Really
Yeah,
ask tough questions. It's sort of like, my daughter's on the verge of starting to look for colleges. And, I'm basically telling them, get in contact with, students, and ask, is the food really that good? Those kinds of, really dig deep and, find out what it's really like rather than, assuming it's a museum, it should be okay. Well,
yeah,
not
yeah,
necessarily. Ask tough questions. It may be uncomfortable for everybody, but it's better to know going in than to
yeah,
get surprised.
yeah. I've and I can speak firsthand as an executive director that um, it doesn't jeopardize the possibility of the hire for people that are interviewing. It actually makes quite an impression when the person is asking some deep, difficult questions. And typically, at least in the search teams that I've been a part of, it makes the people kind of perk up and go, oh, well, this person really is, an
Yeah,
independent thinker, and they're challenging things, and maybe that's who we want. And
yeah,
it might actually help your case a little bit, asking. That is one thing that sometimes you'll say, in an interview, well, you have any questions for us? And the person will just say no. And that
yeah.
doesn't really help very much either.
Yeah, I mean, I know that through like career services and colleges and stuff like that, they always tell you, do your research, do your homework, know the institution backwards and forwards before you go into the interview. Have questions you're going to ask. But yeah, most of us, I think that's partly because so many of us are actually introverts, that we just kind of like, no, I think I know what's going on, and I mean, I know I'm guilty of that too.
Yeah,
But I think it's really critical now. Make sure you know what you're walking into and
yeah,
make sure that you'll be happy there.
yeah, yeah. Yep. Happiness has been a theme of the podcast. Karen, thank you so much. Are you
Oh,
ready for
thank
the
you.
lightning round?
I'm ready for lightning round. This has been fabulous. Thank you.
All right, you've got to choose. You can't have both. Are you coffee or tea?
Tea.
Tea. You're a tea person,
Tea. I'm a tea drinker. Yep.
huh? All right, you have to. This is you're choosing a pet. Do you have cats or guinea pigs?
Oh, definitely cats. I have had one round with my daughter's hamster, and that was enough with rodents. So definitely cats.
They're too much to clean up, huh?
Oh, I was amazed at the amount of um, discharge from such a little teeny tiny animal. It was shocking. So
Yeah, cats are a little more manageable.
yeah, they're definitely cleaner.
All right, so you're sitting down on a Friday night, you're relaxing, you got your tea. Are you going to sit down and watch an action-packed superhero movie or a thriller?
A thriller, I think.
Okay. Yep. Yeah. So this has been a lot of fun. I appreciate your time.
Well, thank you. This has been fabulous. It was
Yeah.
great talking with you.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, you have a good rest of your morning.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks, Karen.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.